Chapter 3. 11:27 a.m. Sam sat in her dilapidated Nissan truck at the stoplight. Who was that man she'd mowed down in the hallway? It might have been a fleeting contact, but he'd left a hell of an impression. Strong, determined, surprised, and even concerned. Sam wrapped her arms around her chest. Not likely. A honk from behind catapulted her forward. She drove down Main Street before pulling into the almost empty parking lot at the vet's office, her insides finally unfurling and relaxing after the tough morning. The animals always helped. It's not that she didn't like people, because she did. But the foster home mill didn't give her much opportunity to understand close relationships. Whenever she'd tried to get close to another child, either they or she'd ended up shipped out within a few months. Sam had grown up watching the various dynamics around her in bewilderment. From loving kindness to sibling fighting to lovers breaking up and making up, everyone appeared to understand some secret rules to making relationships work. Everyone but her. She'd tried several relationships, even had several short-lived affairs. In the last few years, they'd been non-existent. Sam locked her truck and walked through the rear door of the vet hospital, her kind of place. She had a kinship with animals. They'd become her saving grace in an increasingly dismal and lonely world. She stashed her purse in the farthest closet, peeled off her sweater and tossed it on top. Then she tucked in her t-shirt and got to work. Moving through the cages, Sam grinned at Casper, a tabby cat who'd lost his leg in a car accident. "Hey, buddy. How are you doing?" She opened the door and reached inside. Instantly, the cat's heavy guttural engine kicked in. She pulled the big softy out of the cage, careful of his new stump. The bandage had stayed dry at least. That had to be a good sign. She gave him a quick cuddle. "Okay, Casper, back you go. I'll get you fresh water. And how about a clean blanket?" Sam bustled about, taking comfort in the mundane and in the service of others, animal others. She hummed along until she came to the last cage. Inside, a heavily bandaged German shepherd glared at her. She halted at the hideous warning growl. She stretched out a hand to snag the chart hanging from the front of the cage. The growls increased in volume. Sam stepped back to give the injured animal more space. She'd intruded in his comfort zone, something she could respect. Bending to his level, she spoke in a soft voice. Without his trust, taking care of him wouldn't be pleasant for either of them. And this guy looked like he'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. The growl deepened but stayed low-key. A warning without heat. Sam could respect that too. She sat cross-legged at the edge of his space and continued to talk to him, until he calmed down. "Hey, Sam. I didn't hear you come in." Lucy, the gregarious vet assistant, had a voice that boomed throughout the farthest corners of the room, giving Sam no opportunity to ignore it. She hunched her shoulders at the intrusion, keeping her gaze locked on the dog. "I came in the back," she called out in a low voice. The dog stared at her. Sam shifted slightly and narrowed her gaze. The shepherd's gaze followed every movement. She grimaced. Strange, but she could almost sense his interest. "There you are. What are you doing sitting on the bare floor like that? You'll catch a cold." Lucy's voice sounded behind Sam's shoulder. Sam jerked, then twisted around to greet the large older woman, and for a startling moment, saw another Lucy instead, Sam's murdered best friend Lucy from a decade ago. The long, familiar brown hair appeared braided off to one side, with her sweet smile spread across her face. The image was old and faded, and yet still heart-wrenchingly clear. Pangs of guilt wiggled in Sam's belly. The dog's low growl tore through the image. Sam shook herself, concentrating on the office manager and not her old friend. "Hi, Lucy." The older woman fisted her hands on ample hips. "Come on out front and have a warm cup of tea." Sam glanced at the dog. His black gaze locked on the two women. Lucy reached down a beefy hand to help Sam get to her feet. Sam winced. This morning's vision had left her stiff and sore. Her police disaster had left her aching. With slow, careful movements, Sam brushed off her clothes and hung the chart back on the dog's crate. Jesus, girl, you're freezing. Lord, this child can't even take care of herself, let alone no animals. Sam shook her head at Lucy's habit of directing comments to the Almighty above. Still, Lucy had a point. Cole, Sam's constant companion, had settled deeper in her bones. She found herself propelled to the front offices and the small, cozy lunchroom. There, a hearty nudge pushed her to the closest chair. Within minutes, a hot cup of strong tea with a single serving of cream arrived before her. Lucy, with a second cup of tea, took the chair opposite Sam. Unable and unwilling to stop them, Sam confronted her memories of the other Lucy. That Lucy had loved her tea too. The two of them had shared many cups. During one such moment, Sam had broken her own rule and had trusted her enough to tell her about her gift. Poor Lucy. She'd thought it had been so cool. Then one night, after drinking too many B-52s, she'd told everyone, once again making Sam an oddity and outsider. And reminding Sam of a sad truth, even friends couldn't be trusted. A lesson she hadn't forgotten since. Her friend had died an ugly death. And Sam couldn't help her. More guilt. Sam sighed. Heavy thoughts? Asked Lucy gently. Care to share? Sam's mouth kicked up at the corners. Nothing worth sharing, she murmured. Lucy leaned back with an unsurprised nod. Just so you know, I'm always here if you ever want to talk. After a moment, she continued in a bright, cheerful voice. Here. Try one. A plate of cookies appeared beside her hot mug. Thanks. And Sam meant it. Choosing a peanut butter cookie, she bit into it. She closed her eyes, a tiny moan escaping. In the darkness, the rich buttery peanut taste filled her mouth. Delicate yet robust and so good. Not bad, huh? Sam nodded, wasting no time in popping the rest of the morsel into her mouth. Lucy nudged the plate closer. Sam grinned and snatched up a second cookie. Lucy gave her a fat smile of pleasure. Her mouth full, Sam considered the woman beside her. This Lucy gave from the heart, freely offering acceptance and reserving judgment. Sam understood the value of the gift. At the same time, all that emotion made her nervous. Thanks for the tea and cookies. She took her cup to the sink. What do you think of our new patient? The German Shepherd. Sam spun around. What happened to him? Lucy rose and brought her cup to the sink. Sarah found him. Lucy turned around. You remember my daughter, Sarah? She works at the seniors' facility. Without waiting for a response, she continued talking. She called in to say a resident had found the dog injured in the parking lot. Dr. Wascott drove over and picked him up. Sam watched as Lucy turned on the hot water and dribbled a little dish soap over the cup in her hand. Sarah, Sam vaguely remembered, was activity coordinator at a home between here and Portland. Lucy gazed at Sam. He was in tough shape. And since he woke up after surgery, well? She placed the clean cup upside down on the drying rack. He won't let any of us near him, unless he's sedated. Sam chewed on her bottom lip. Is he eating? Drinking? Through his IV, Lucy said with a small grim smile. We'll see what he's like when it comes time to check his wounds. Don't get too attached. His prognosis isn't good. Already halfway through the doorway leading to the back of the hospital, Sam stilled and glanced back, seeing only concern in the other woman's eyes. Resolutely, Sam headed to her charges. The shepherd's low growl warned her halfway. It's okay, boy. It's just me. I'll be taking care of you. Give you food, fresh water, and friendship. The things that help us get along in life. Although she kept her voice quiet, warm, and even-toned, the growl remained the same. She couldn't blame him. He might get along without friendships, but she wanted them. Except for her friendship with Lucy long ago, Sam had never had that elusive relationship that others took for granted. Sam approached the dog's cage with care. According to his chart, he'd had surgery to repair internal bleeding and to set a shattered leg. On top of that, he'd suffered several broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder bone, and was missing a huge patch of skin on both hindquarters. Written in red and circled were the words, "aggressive and dangerous." The growling stopped. Sam squatted to stare into his eyes. The dog should have a name. He didn't give a damn. But a name gave the dog a presence and existence, an identity. How about? She thought for a long moment. I know. How about we call you Major? The dog exploded into snarls and hideous barking, his ears flattened, and absolute hate filled his eyes. Jesus. Sam skittered to the far corner of the room, her hand to her chest, sure her heart would break free of its rib cage. Is everything okay back here? Sam turned in surprise to see one of the vets standing behind her, frowning. Sorry, she yelled over the din of the other animals that had picked up the shepherd's fear. She waited for the animals to calm down before continuing. I'd thought of a brilliant name for the shepherd, but from his reaction, I think he hates it. The vet walked over and bent down to assess his patient. It could have been your tone of voice, or the inflection in the way you said the name. He'd been abused, even before this accident. After a thoughtful pause, he added, I'm not sure, but it might have been kinder to have put him down. No. Sam stared at him in horror. Don't say that. He'll come around. At his doubtful look, she continued, I know he will. Give him a chance. That she seemed to be asking the vet to give her a chance hung heavy in the room, yet she didn't think he understood that. He stared at her, shrewdness and wisdom in his eyes. Then again, maybe she'd misjudged him. She shifted, uneasy under the intense gaze. We'll see. We'll have lots of opportunity to assess his progress as he recuperates. Sam had to be satisfied with that. She knew the dog was worth saving, and so damn it was she. Her salvation and that of the dog were tied together in some unfathomable way. She could sense it. She'd fight tooth and nail to keep him safe. In so doing, maybe she could save herself. 11:45 a.m. The bastard had been busy. Brant grimly surveyed the room. The woman lay sprawled across the bed, killed by multiple stab wounds, if the massive blood loss was anything to go by. Any number of perps could have done this, but Brant knew the scene would be clean. Squeaky clean, just like every other one he blamed on this asshole. And the woman would have drugs in her bloodstream, just enough so she wouldn't have been able to struggle, at least not much. A signature obvious from the more recent cases. Brant frowned. This case would move to the head of Brant's list. Ammunition for a task force to put this asshole behind bars. His fists clenched and unclenched. Christ, he wanted to kill the bastard himself. Blood spattered the walls, carpet, the trashed bedding, a few drops even going so far as to hit the ceiling. A large pool of black blood had congealed on the floor beside the night table. This woman hadn't been murdered, she'd been butchered. She must have been in a drugged sleep at the time of the attack. The only signs of struggle were on the bed, and not many of them at that. She also had long brown hair with a hint of a curl in it at the ends. Or would have had, if the stands weren't flattened by the weight of the dried blood. The bedding was some kind of ruffled rose paisley thing. 2 points to Samantha Blair. Deep crown moldings on the ceiling gave her a third. Brant, the young man who called this in, is waiting out back. Adam was the youngest member of the team, with only 6 months' experience behind him. Always pale, today his red hair and freckles stood out more than ever, giving his face a clownish appearance. He tried to look anywhere but at the body on the bed. Kevin said you can take the lead. He'll be here soon. Another test. Fine with him. Then let's go have a talk with the guy out back. Brant headed outside of the brick house to question the waiting man. Tall, slim, and overwrought, the mid-20s man sat on the brick step. His hair was brush-cut, his head cradled by his folded arms. His blue shirt was soaked with tears, and his shoulders heaved and shuddered even as Brant watched. Brant waited to give the young man a moment. Jason Dean? The younger man snapped to his feet, nodding in between the tears. Yes, that's me. Is she being taken away now? He wiped his eyes with his sleeve, like a young child. Brant glanced back inside the small dwelling, swollen with law enforcement and CSI. Soon. The coroner isn't quite done yet. The man's face paled even further, and his bottom lip trembled. He took several deep bracing breaths and nodded. With gentle coaxing, Brant got the whole story out of him. They both worked for the same company, and had been going out for close to a year now. They'd gone out for dinner and drinks last night, before returning to her place. He'd stayed for several hours, leaving around 1:30 in the morning. When she didn't show up at work, he'd called numerous times and then had slipped over to check on her. After finishing with Jason, Brant walked back inside to wait. Within minutes, Kevin arrived with the other two homicide detectives on the team, Daniel and Seth. Brant paced back and forth in the hallway, chewing on the information in his mind, while he filled them in on what he knew. It's him, isn't it? The one you're always talking about? Asked Daniel, the second youngest member on the team, a frown wrapped around his forehead. He tucked his thumbs into his pant pockets. Daniel's paunch matched his wife's 5 months pregnant belly, a fact the team teased him about mercilessly. Each team member in the East Precinct pulled long hours. Brant respected that. He wasn't here to rock the boat. But any cases that could be the bastards, he wanted in on. Simple. And so far nothing. Except more bodies. Grimly, Brant watched as the gurney was wheeled into the bedroom. Chances are good it's him. Toxicology should confirm it. Brant leaned against the bedroom wall and tried to assess the scene, a difficult task with his emotions still unsettled. He'd have to wait for the tests to come back to know for sure. She'd been deliberately arranged with her legs splayed wide apart, her arms above her head. Open display, mocking and degrading her for maximum humiliation. Another similarity between the killer's victims, posed, yet not always in the same way. Irrational rage from a rational mind. Okay, we're ready to move the body, announced one of the CSI team. Brant nodded. Thanks. How's the scene? Will you get much? The investigator shook his head. Not much. The scene is clean. We might find something when we run our tests, but I'm not counting on it. Her name was Mandy Saxon, said Brant abruptly. Her purse sat on the kitchen table, unopened and undisturbed, along with a briefcase of work she'd brought home. She'd been an accountant, a 30-year-old junior member of a successful firm here in Portland, with her whole life ahead of her. Now it was all behind her. Stone-faced, the detectives watched two men bag and load the body onto the gurney, before wheeling it out the door. Brant would catch up with her at the morgue tomorrow. Turning back, he caught sight of the coroner leaving. James, have you got a time of death? The grizzled coroner answered, The best I can do at the moment is between 2 and 5. James shook his head. I'll have more after the autopsy. The coroner walked out, after smacking Adam's shoulder. Turning back to the crime scene, Brant watched as one of the CSI officers picked a tiny object off the carpet with tweezers. He waited until the item had been bagged and tagged. Stanley, what did you find? The man stood, holding the bag aloft for Brant to see. It appears to be a diamond, or a zirconium. Have to wait until I get it back to the lab, to know for sure. Brant stared at the tiny twinkling object. Earring? It could be the right size. He turned toward the open doorway. The stretcher had long gone. He'd have to wait to check what jewelry the victim wore. He walked over to the open jewelry box on the dresser to rummage through the few quality items inside. All the settings appeared intact. None matched the stone. Stanley, who'd worked alongside Kevin and his team for over a decade, joined him. "I'll run it through some tests. It's pretty small, probably part of a design." Like a 4-leaf clover design. Brant couldn't remember the exact details of Ms. Blair's statement. Had the ring always been missing one jewel, or only the last time she'd seen it? Had she even mentioned that detail? He'd have to wait until he got back to the office to be sure, but it felt right. That waif's story sounded beyond wild, but that look in her eye had been real. Whatever demon drove her, she believed in it. Staring down at the tiny jewel, Brant realized he couldn't discount it either. "Okay, keep me posted." Stanley nodded and headed back to his kit with the evidence bag. It took another hour before the room emptied, leaving only the brutal evidence of death behind. Bloodstains perpetuated the smell of death. Vestiges of violence remained behind. Brant swore he could almost see and hear the play-by-play of her death from the scene laid out before him. He didn't have psychic abilities in the normal sense. Still, like many of his co-workers, he had a strong intuition. Whether it had developed through his years of police work or through his long friendship with Stefan didn't matter. He'd learned a long time ago to listen to it. And right now it was screaming at him. 2:20 p.m. Kevin Bresson pulled into the station parking lot. Lunch was over, and the place was packed as usual. Around the back of the building, he found a spot and parked. "Home sweet home," he said to Adam, who was sitting in the passenger seat beside him. "If you say so." Kevin glanced over at him. "Can't be cynical at your age. Come on. You haven't been on the force long enough for that. Give it a decade or two like me, then you've earned the right to be sour." Adam got out and closed the door of the black SUV. He waited while Kevin grabbed his evidence bag before walking to the rear entrance. "I'm not being cynical, exactly. But it's a little hard to stay positive when you come from scenes like that one." Kevin's normally stern face darkened. "I know what you mean." Adam held the door open for him. "Do you think Brant is right? That a serial killer is working here?" Kevin's pace never slowed, as he headed for the elevator that would take them to their third-floor offices. "I don't know. I've only seen some of the evidence. It would take more to convince me fully. Still, he has a couple valid arguments. Too many to discount his theory. He thinks this is another one. And that's possible. We'll work on it the same as every other case, and either he'll pull it for his list, or he won't. We have enough work to do without keeping tabs on what he's up to." "Right." Kevin entered the waiting elevator, with Adam on his heels. Kevin was tired and fed up. The last thing he wanted was for Brant to be correct about a serial killer operating under their noses for decades. Just as the door was about to shut, a yell went up. Kevin stopped the doors from closing long enough for Dylan Hathaway to get on. "Thanks, Kevin." Dylan grinned that affable smile that always pissed Kevin right off. "I hear you caught another bad one this morning. Let me know if you need any of my expertise to close this for you." Kevin stiffened. Just because the kid had a couple college degrees didn't make him better than the veterans on the force. Now, if Dylan had some experience to go with that piece of paper, then people might be more inclined to listen. As it was, Dylan, in his late 20s, had only about 6 months of experience. Kevin wondered why he didn't go into business. He had that wheeling-dealing kind of attitude, and dressed the part too. He'd have done well. Covertly, he studied Dylan's designer suit and lavender shirt. No wonder the guys in the department laughed at him. although it was his insufferable, know-it-all attitude that made everyone want to kick his ass. Adam wouldn't stay quiet. Kevin shot him a warning look, but it was too late. "I think we can handle it. Other people beside you know how to do their jobs, you know." Grinning, Dylan put his hands out in front of him in exaggerated supplication. "Hey, no problem, Adam. Just wanted to let you know that you can call on me any time. But I understand pride. So just trundle along in your usual way." Kevin clenched his jaw and rolled his eyes. He did take pride in the number of cases he'd closed over the years. But no matter how many he solved, or how many assholes he put behind bars, always a dozen more were ready to take their place. If Brant was right, they were in trouble. A serial killer with the skills to stay undetected for decades was just bad news for everyone. But working with Brant was a different story than asking this young upstart for help. Brant might be new to the department, but Kevin respected the man, unlike Dylan. Brant was a straight-up guy you could count on in a tight spot. What made working with him hard was his special assignment status. Not that he played the maverick card, but he worked with his own agenda. Kevin wasn't sure what Brant did all day exactly, only that he showed up for their meetings and any crime scenes that fit the parameters he was searching for. Cushy job if you could get it. As long as he stayed out of Kevin's way, then Brant could work on all the task force preparations he wanted to, no harm done. The elevator opened. Kevin, already focused on his job at hand, pushed all worries of Detective Brant Sutherland from his mind.